Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VSM Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Krakowski, joined, as always, by Goran Vasevich.
Hello, Daniel. How's it going?
Extremely well, because today we have perhaps our most prestigious guest to date. You may know him from the mayoral race currently and going on in St. Paul. He's currently the Ward 1 councilman as well. We have Councilman Dai Thao.
Thank you. Thanks for putting this together, and thanks for inviting me to be here. It's an honor to be here, and thanks for that generous introduction.
Well, yeah, thank you. I like I said off air, I appreciate you coming by and conversating with us about the future of the city, and I'm more than happy to let our viewers know kind of what your game plan is, and maybe go a little bit further in depth other than the 5 minutes that you had at the Pioneer Endicott event.
Yeah, so we saw you speak at an event hosted at a good friend of ours, Clint Blazer's property, and you and the rest of the candidates got together. Your message was really powerful. You're speaking extremely dynamic. I think you drew a lot of people to your side in that. So it's awesome that we get a chance to share that and share some of your vision for the future for this city. But maybe before we get into the future, if we could go maybe a little bit into the past and understand a little bit more about who you are and kind of how you got to be in this position that you're in right now.
Sure. Thank you. I'd be happy to share. I came here when I was 8 years old. Political refugee in Laos. After the United States pulled out of Vietnam, they also pulled out the resources out of Laos. And so it took us 5 years to get into Thailand, a Thai refugee camp. Along the way, I lost 2 sisters and a younger brother. In the refugee camp, we're surrounded by barbed wires, and there wasn't a lot of food. I remember walking the market, following people who have food, because in case they might throw something away and they're left over, it would be your meal. I remember a bunch of kids like us chasing one day a grasshopper. They got huge grasshopper flew into the camp, and we all chased that thing down, and that was
got
deal,
it, yeah.
Right? So I always thought that going through all of that trauma, and I thought that America would be paradise. But then when we got to Minnesota, I remember, I was called Chink, Gook. I was told to go back to my country, and these were adults. Yeah. And so there was, it was a lot of confusion. And where is my country? And it was very painful.
Right.
But I could handle all of that. But then when I saw other refugee kids being bullied and oppressed, for some reason I couldn't take it. Yeah. I just couldn't bear watching them experiencing and feeling the hurt that I felt when I went through. And so I would go and protect them. And that been a recurring theme in my life. And then in 1989, when I was entering middle school, my father went back to join the communist resistance. And so that was the last summer that I saw him. I never got a chance to tell him how much he meant to me. And, as an adult, sometimes I think about it. Yeah. Had I knew that he was leaving, maybe if I could, I would possibly convince him to stay instead. So those are just things that I think about as an adult. And then then my mom raised the rest of us in the public housing in North Minneapolis. Grew up really poor. We didn't. The house didn't have heat. It didn't have AC. My mom and I would wait in the winter for a loaf of bread. We would take the number 9 bus to South Minneapolis because there was this place called the Free Store.
Okay.
And we go there because everything there is free. It's like,
Can't beat that. Yeah.
It's donated items, and you got missing GI Joe arms or a GI Joe with a missing arm or leg or something like that. But that was cool, right?
Right, right.
That's what you could afford. And I know, like our house was there was roaches everywhere, and I remember feeling really worthless, not wanting to live. And then I asked God. I said, the only thing that kept me going was just reading the scripture. And so I asked God, look, I don't want to be rich because I don't know what it's like to be rich, but use me to do what you want me to do and to help others. And this was probably in my teens. And I guess I believe that God heard my call, my prayer, and then I from there I started just helping folks in the community. A lot of racial equity work that I did. I went into IT, so my background's IT.
Okay.
I've been like a MIS manager, IT director. When I'm not at the city council, I'm a IT manager for the Greater Minneapolis Crisis Nursery. And I got into this work because when President Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, I was living in the suburb in Fridley, and for some reason it didn't feel right that I had a nice home, I had a nice neighborhood, but people in the rural area back in the city were struggling. And some of them were struggling more than my family when we were living in the public housing. And for me, that didn't feel right. And so I took a sabbatical leave to do community organizing. And that's when I learned how power works. That's when I learned how public policy works, and that people empower people at the top. They use public policy to govern, but public policies are rules. And whoever is empowered writes those rules,
right?
And sometimes it don't benefit, people of color or minorities or things like that. And so that's how I got interested in government in 2013 when the Ward 1 seat became available. I ran. There was 7 of us, and I defeated all of them. And through the grace of God and the people, they thought that I would be a good person to be their voice. And we came in there in 2013. We got a lot of stuff done. We're hardworking. The thing about being Asian American is that if I don't work hard, my mom still get on my case, right? And then, right? And then our culture is to respect people, to respect the elders, to help the very vulnerable folks in the community, to emphasize on education. In the Hmong culture, we believe that in order for me to be successful is to help you be successful first.
Yeah.
So because in Laos, if you have a farm, we come and help you farm. Right, slash and burn, and then we help you plant, and then when we're done with you, then you come and help us plant our field.
Yeah.
And in case that year the crop for me might be bad, but we have yours. And so that philosophy applied to public policy, applies to government, it applies to community. We're strong when we work together, when we stand united. And as Asian American, and Hmong American, we're not here to take resources away from other communities. We know what it's like to not have resource, and so it is ingrained in our value to make sure that we all get our piece of the pie, right? That you get your piece of the pie, and we spoke a little bit about that. And so that's why we need each other to work with each other. And so our campaign vision is to continue to protect people, all neighborhood, to ensure that we promote equity across the city, and then preserve St. Paul's proud heritage. St. Paul is an immigrant city, and whether you're
my family is same story. My grandparents moved here from Poland and settled a big chunk of what's now the northeast suburbs, but they had a bunch of farmland out there. became an eminent domain issue eventually for the freeway, but they were well past the point where they were farming that. So
northeast Minneapolis, or
northeast suburbs of St. Paul, so more like the Shoreview type area. Right at the intersection of Rice Street and 694 actually is where their farm building was located originally.
Oh wow!
So that was a while back, but I think one important thing that you touched on for sure, especially in today's political climate where there's been some strong backlash from a lot of the progress that we've made in equality right now. Just really re-emphasizing that and recognizing such a diverse city like we have right here to make sure that that's something we're paying attention to and focusing on again.
Absolutely.
No, I was going to say, yeah, obviously being an immigrant myself, I came here, some 22, 23 years ago, refugee similar to, you, and really I connect with your story and recognize that the Twin Cities in general is a city that's immigrant heavy, from the Somalian community to people from Eastern Europe, etc. We do have a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. If the three of us right here, right? Mm-hmm. If we go back a couple hundreds of years, we would be those three guys that are protecting the Irish that are just coming over, right? They're protecting the right, or the I don't know, the German, whoever that's coming over, and so time has changed, but human nature has not changed, and so that's why it takes leaders like both of you and public servant like me to have that understanding. And to protect all kinds of people that's coming here, because we're building for the future. Those are future home buyers. Immigrants are future
and
home
also
buyers,
allow for the opportunity. I'm a big kind of advocate for that, even though I don't feel like a lot or anything was directly given as far as monetary to us or to my family when we came. The opportunity is, to me, what the greatest gift of all is, that you're given the opportunity to succeed, which is what we are looking, to protect, and what you are too.
Absolutely.
And just for a little bit of context, I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of real estate investors in general tend to be more fiscally conservative, just because entrepreneurs tend to want to protect what they're creating a little bit and pay as little taxes as possible, because in their mind they've built it. I want to go back to, you said when you were living in North Minneapolis and the public housing there, that you were depressed, that you were borderline suicidal. Can you explain where that came from, what that felt like, just so, hopefully people who've never been in that position, who would just look at it and say, well, make something of yourself, and clearly you did. But what that feels like and the obstacles that you have to overcome, not just for you personally, but for all of the people that you're currently trying to help in the city.
Sure. Well, I think that for my experience has just been that I had an identity crisis, right? Like when I went to school, I see white kids, I see wealthy kids. They had Star Wars lunch boxes and all that. They wear nice clothes. They had whatever they had the latest toys, G.I. Joe, Transformer, whatever. And then when I came home, I came to this place that was coal, roaches, mice. My parents couldn't provide the kind of clothes that I wanted or shoes. We have one pair of shoes that we bought in the fall that was supposed to last for the whole winter, and there was not even boots. You know what I mean?
Right.
And these are like Pro Wings, Pro Spirits. I don't know if you remember those shoes, but they're like the cheapest shoe. You can Google it, right? Like cheap stuff. Yeah. And then we go to Kmart, and if we buy a set of clothes that's supposed to last us the whole year, and so there's that identity issue, and then I began to not be proud of who I am. You know, I didn't want to be Hmong. I didn't like my parents. Why couldn't my parents be like the other parents, the white kids' parents and the black kids' parents? And so it started self-discrimination, you know?
Right.
And then, you know, it just seems like hopeless. And you have like 2 pair of socks. And you wear one today because the other one is drying on the handrail. And then and then in the evening you wash in the bathtub and you switch out, you know? And it was just, you know, I didn't understand this country, and the city of Minneapolis was as far as you could walk.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get into this mindset, and then plus in the public housing, they had these sound barrier, these sound wall. They took it down. Some of them are still there, but where Heritage Park is right now, Glen Olson Highway. All right. So back then they had these big, huge sound wall. To me, those were just like the barbed wires in the refugee camp.
Right.
And did they put us here to keep us out of downtown, and that we have to sneak into downtown? Because when you go into downtown, you get wealthy people, like nice clothes, nice car, big tall building, and then on this side of the sound wall, it's just the public housing.
Yeah.
And so,
sorry for context. What year was this?
This is back in 85 all the way to 97, 98.
Yeah.
That 98, 99, that's
I wasn't
when they
even
closed
aware
it.
that there was that migration in the 80s.
Yeah, they put all the poor people there, all the immigrants, all the poor Indians, Black, Latino, and so we were deprived of opportunity. We talk about that.
Yep.
And so it just make you feel worthless. And then coming from a war-torn country, there's a lot of trauma around that, and having siblings that die in the war and things like that, and so it just make you not want to live. Like, it's like, why am I like this?
Yeah.
You know, I'm worthless. I'm not worth anything.
You can, I think too, if you just look at in general, and this has always been my theory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, when you look at the hierarchy of needs that people are focusing on, you know, if you're worried about food, if you're worried about shelter, if you're worried about some of those more things that so many of us take for granted, who have had a lot of opportunities, and we're very blessed, you know, it's easy to forget that once you have those covered, then it's easy to look into something else, into looking into the art, into looking into, you know, furthering your education, into, you know, some type of entrepreneurial activity. But when you're still kind of looking at getting some of those more base needs taken care of, that takes up more of your time. That takes some of your focus, and you know, it does limit some of your opportunity.
That's
true.
Agree? Oh yeah, and there's a lot of stress, right?
Yeah.
And then like my parents, my mom, you know, she's seen more than I have, but she never got the mental health issue that she needed. And we were on assistance. We're on food stamp every month. You know, she get, I don't know how much, but we didn't. We resort to eating weeds. You know, we eat dandelions, and they didn't come and cut our grass. And so my mom would just say, "Hey, all right, go to the backyard. You see those yellow flower." Just take as much as you can, bring it in, we're gonna steam it. I don't know how she figured out that we could eat that stuff. So we steam that, and then we dip it in salt, you know, and then you know, eat it with rice, and then from there we went to tree. I don't know how she figured out, okay, that's
what
tree
was
you
edible
can
and
eat,
what wasn't.
right?
Yeah.
Right? So it was like primitive, but it's what we resort to.
It's incredible that you would have to go through all that, you know,
in this country.
in this country.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people are unaware. So, I mean, that shed a lot of light on what it was, you know, back in the day, you know, in the late 80s, for you and your family to, you know, basically survive, and for yourself to survive, not just from a physical, but also a mental hurdle that you mentioned that you had to overcome.
And thanks for sharing so much of your personal story and journey as well. You know, a lot of people may want to be more selective of what they share, but I think it's really fantastic to know who your mayor is, and to know where they came from, how, the genesis of how they became who they are today. So looking ahead a little bit and looking at, because I was on your website today, I heard you speak, of course, as well. And one of the big missions of your campaign seems to be bringing more jobs to St. Paul, which fantastic. I think everyone can get behind that. When looking at job creation, and also kind of coming from the perspective of again, you're going back to your origin a little bit here, and how do you look at those two? Because again, let's say that in general, are you do you identify with a political party?
Democrat,
yeah, right?
DFL.
So, yep, perfect. So, when you are a Democrat, and a lot of the entrepreneurs, small business owners, et cetera, tend to be on the opposite side of the aisle. How do you kind of bridge that gap? How do you, as a Democrat, try and reach out to job creators and encourage them to move their businesses to St. Paul?
Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the first thing and all good public servants should just be aware of is that they don't have all the answer, mm-hmm. and that business knows how to run their business better than a public servant. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to keep an open mind, to be a good listener, but to also to hear the needs and the concern
right.
of the business owner. And I think overall, what I'm hearing is that business, whatever category of business you're in, business needs stability. They need to be able to predict what the best possible way they can for what the future forecast, what that might be, so that they could prepare themselves to adapt to that sort of environment. And they can, I think that's one of their first priority. The second priority is that once they have that sort of forecast, then they can figure out how they can sustain their business and grow their business. And so that's a public servant and that's a candidate. And those are the things that I try to think about when I'm working with businesses. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that business, as we're all stakeholders, right? We're all part of this together. And so I think rules and laws or public policy or ordinance, they're good, but they should also be flexible. Mm-hmm. And so if an ordinance that's working right now or an ordinance that worked 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, if that's not working, then we need to go back in there and change those ordinance, open it up based on data and reasoning, and so that we can change that, right? So that we can benefit the business of today, because it might not benefit back then. So that's sort of my style about ordinance and policy, to keep them flexible. I think so. What we've been seeing in my job, I'm also on the St. Paul Port Authority. So we got a bunch of program there, whether it's brownfield, it's environmental cleanup to prepare space for industrial or development or where that might be, energy program, rebate, right? Energy rebate program, or working relocation or co-locating a business or expansion. And these are all good paying jobs. So we're focusing on jobs that pay $20, $30, $40 an hour. And so those are the work that I'm already doing. And what I see is that we see less of company moving into the city of St. Paul. We see more of small business and mid-sized business expanding. And so I think that's something that we have to keep in mind and how we prioritize, right? So that means that we got to treat business like your business a good deal. Right? We treat you well because you're expanding and you're growing, and more energy and resource and concentration should be, I call it assets investment. So we invest in our assets, and then while we're doing that, we can spend some time and energy to recruit new business to come into the city of St. Paul. Right. And we do that in partnership with Greater MSP, the city of Minneapolis, working and the Port Authority. So they're doing their job. But I think as a mayor, we should spend more time, more resource on helping the small business grow and the mid-sized business grow. Another thing that has not been done much is that the fastest growing sector in job creation, it's the immigrant businesses. And so some of these immigrants are coming from poor neighborhood, poor country, and they're very inspired by the American spirit, right?
Got one right here.
The boss, right? And so, and we need to pay attention to them, and we need to give them the kind of access to capital or a micro loan that they need. Because right now, a lot of immigrant businesses, they go and they create those capital from their family. But if we can match that, if we can help them find a good location, help them market and brand their stuff, then we can expand. Now, another thing about this is that women-owned business and immigrant-owned business, community of color, people of color-owned business, they tend to hire people from that community. And so now they're creating opportunity from folks from their community. And so I think that's something we have to keep in mind. Another thing about job creation is that when we have a economic strategy, in the past, what we do is, okay, this is our economic strategy. Everybody, this strategy or this plan, everybody should use this plan, and it should work for everybody.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. I think that, so for, again, different type of business or different community require its own set of strategy, tactics, and tools, and its own pot of resources.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, right, because that's what we talk about when we talk about equity. One system doesn't fit all, but we need to take the time to create different tools and different strategy for different parts, different sector, or different communities.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear you say, helping the businesses that are already in St. Paul continue to expand and develop. Because when I'm driving around the city, I see businesses everywhere, and I think helping them, not only is it going to help the business owner, but we drive around. I spend a lot of time in a pretty accurate, I feel, cross-section of what St. Paul is. I spend a lot of time in Summit, West 7th neighborhood. I spend a lot of time in Frogtown, East Side.
I mean, we, as like you, all of our agents and VSM as a company, and, the real estate that we own too, it's all around the city, where I feel like I've seen every house.
But what's so exciting about that is also engaging the community as part of the workforce versus importing some other company which is going to import their workers as well into the city. It's great, it can potentially bring additional revenue into the city, but by I think 2020, we were just talking to Ravi, there's going to be a worker shortage of 175,000 people in the metro area.
Do you know Ravi Norman, the CEO of Thor Construction, by any chance? Okay. Yeah, he was here for a podcast, and he's a strategic advisor to VSM and a mentor of mine. So we have a really strong relationship, and what they're doing there for the north side of Minneapolis is really inspiring.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned, because VSM being a St. Paul-based real estate company, and our, for example, hiring practices, and what we bring to the table is we have an employee here that we've hired, and she loves to be being part of the company, and just 2 days ago got an accepted purchase agreement. She lives in Minneapolis right now, but because of the job here, she bought a home in St. Paul, and it's her first home. So those are type of things.
Congrats!
Right, those are type of things that we want to create as we grow our businesses, to help not just plant our company roots or us as the owners, but also all of the people that we engage as far as employees or independent contractors. So that right there would, grow not just our company, but the community in general.
Absolutely, and that's why it's really important to help the mid-sized small business grow. Now, I think that's the first priority, and the second priority, when you're talking about recruiting a big company to come in here, we have to be smart about it.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say that if we're going to recruit a real estate firm, then when I go visit them, you guys are coming with me, right? Because you do business here. That's your sector. You know what's good, what's not good. We're all going to go and persuade them, and then when we go, so one of my interests is tech firm.
Yep.
That's just
ours too.
Okay. So when we go, it's not just me and my PED or planning economic development team. When we go, we're bringing the CEOs, we're bringing small business, we're bringing representation from the university and colleges, we're bringing the district council directors, we're bringing a couple of families, right? And so we're all going to, as an entourage, maybe 20, 30 of us, and we're giving them our perspective that the city of St. Paul, from the neighborhood standpoint to the CEO standpoint, from the university and everything in between, why St. Paul is the best place to do your business here, to relocate here. We might not be able to give you $14 a square foot like some other suburb, but we may be able to just do 19 per square foot, but we bring other values that you can't find anywhere else. And so I think that those are some of the strategy that we should apply.
I think that's important, and just to kind of go back our story, and like Ryan and myself and Dario, we started, us three at one table in our building. At no point in time did we ever feel
one table.
Right, one table.
Wow.
Did we feel that we could, or that there was an outlet where we can engage the city or the community in order to help us grow. We felt very alone, like on an island, to make things work. And even today, I still don't know of any type of programs, incentives.
I tried to get a hold of the city last year. I forgot the building that I was looking for the opportunity, but wanted to potentially look at it for us, maybe potentially for myself as a commercial real estate to develop. And the person on the phone just said that they're only trying to bring artists into St. Paul right now. So if I can figure out a way to turn it into something to bring more artists into the city, then we have a conversation. Otherwise, I should just go figure it out.
Yes. Right. So I think that right now, that's how we feel as a small business, that we're currently represented or not represented in St. Paul. So even though we love the city, we still have to consider other options where we think we're wanted. What do you think, if you were the mayor, what you could bring to the table? That's something that's tangible that we could, look forward to in order to help grow our business and make it flourish. And it's just something that's, like I said, nothing's happening. So something will be a positive.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sorry that you had that experience. I think that there's room for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. There's room for everybody at the table, and that's my style. And so when I'm elected as mayor, I look forward to having you at the table among other business leaders and community stakeholders, and so that we get to hear where each other's coming from. I think it would be great for other folks at the table to hear your experience, starting from a one room, one table to get to where you are now, and then connecting that story to the other people at the table, and then looking at the challenges of the city.
Right.
We need to increase our tax base. We need to have a safer city where people feel like this is their city, they belong here. And then based on that, we can say, well, in terms of how do we support the small businesses so that we can achieve the outcome that we want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that as a mayor,
that's a great step in the right direction is the outreach, which again, we don't see it right now, and I don't know why or how, but that is the step in the right direction. I think just outreach to hear us out, which is kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, it's about style, right? Yeah. And so I came from a community organizing background. I came from a IT background where we can take really complex project, and then you break that down into a small task. And then as a community organizer, you know the interests of everybody.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, this is where VSM could fit in. This is where the chamber it could fit in, and then based on that, what are timeline? What do we need? Each party needs to do to get to where we need to go. And so with that mindset and that style, that means that it's important to have everybody at the table.
Yeah.
It can't be, and we may not always agree, but we're hearing each other out, and we're as a majority, we figure out what is best for our city, so that we can all progress or prosper together.
Yeah, and just the way we do things here at VSM, as far as we have kind of a singular goal or a vision, and I think when you think about it, all the people that are at the table have a singular vision of wanting to create something, wanting to be bigger and better, create an overall better community. And if we have those fundamentals down, I think the details can be ironed out. And again, from talking to people locally, I feel like we're all on the same page, but things are getting lost, especially when it comes to execution, to actually put things in motion and move forward. And just an example, you mentioned IT, businesses, jobs, etc. We're in Cray Plaza. It was known as the Gaultier Plaza, but renamed after the Cray Supercomputer Company, which had about 200,000 square feet of office space here. They have since left and moved to the Mall of America. So that's a considerable amount of jobs, a big tenant in this building that has left. And I can't imagine that, fine, they couldn't work something out with the landlord, but if they didn't approach the city about different opportunity within St. Paul, it would be crazy for me to think that no one engaged them, or they engaged somebody, but a deal couldn't have been made. But that's a big loss.
Employees.
That's a huge loss, right, in my eyes. Mm-hmm. So I don't know the details, but those are the type of things that we have to stop doing and not do.
Mm-hmm. What I'm really excited about is the way that you mentioned, everyone coming together at the table, because at the end of the day, we pretty much all do have the same goals. We want to provide opportunity for everybody. We want to provide opportunity for ourselves. But sometimes the difference is just the methodology in which we get there, where I'm using Minneapolis as an example right now because there's a pretty interesting case study that just went on where the city council in Minneapolis passed new legislation stating that there can be no longer any sort of discrimination against Section 8 tenants. With the landlord, typical difficulty with a tenant on Section 8 is that because they're typically less vested in the property themselves, they tend to financially right. Less vested. They tend to not take the same type of care of the property as a tenant who would hope to get their whole security deposit back. And kind of what I'm seeing from that, when that was being debated, there was a lot of contention between the two parties. I remember an attorney went up at one of the hearings that they had there, one of the forums, and just gave a pretty detailed argument on, here are the pros and cons. This is going to be what the costs are. Here's the benefits. And it was literally just boilerplate standard language. Sat down and some guy turned around and called her a racist. And because it is a racially charged issue, right, in a lot of cases. But really what I'm seeing, kind of coupling that experience now, a lot of the investors that I work with are now much more inclined to want to start investing in St. Paul. So I see a lot of dollars in real estate wanting to come back to St. Paul, which historically had a lot of difficulty attracting those investors because of some malicious enforcement of some of the code. We had another guest on who, I don't know if you ever heard that story of the gentleman who got in the lawsuit with the city, Housing Hub. Took it up to the Supreme Court and ended up getting the head of the inspection, and whatever they were called for the St. Paul, was removed from that position, and they kind of had to battle back and forth for that happy medium on what are we going to do for landlords. And from my perspective as a landlord looking specifically to invest in St. Paul, there's a lot of there's a very small sliver of St. Paul that I feel in the general public's mind is considered a good area. I don't need to go into where it is, but I think we all have a pretty good idea where I'm talking about. And the rest of it could use some capital investment to improve it. So, it makes a lot of sense to me, whatever we can do to bring as much money in here to renovate these houses, to turn them into, upscale, nicer rental properties is going to benefit the city. Because as you've experienced as someone who lived in public housing, the city government, county, whoever's running it, doesn't always do the best job either.
Yeah, and I think, maybe it's a two-part question. A, what are your thoughts on the legislation that was passed in Hennepin County regarding Section 8? Or do you see that happening in St. Paul? And because it's, like you said, it's...
Yeah, sorry for my rambling methodology of delivering that question.
Like you said, what that has essentially done is open up doors to us flourishing a little bit more because investors are going from Minneapolis to St. Paul because of that.
Yeah, I think that the starting place should be acknowledging what exists out there, right? Yep. So I think it's fair to say that we have really good landlords who do their best to take care of their property, and they provide a tremendous service to the city and the residents, and they pay taxes, and they're leaders in our community. I think that exists. Mm-hmm. I also think that there are people who are on the Section 8 voucher program that are very responsible. They know that this is their only chance, and they take good care of the property, and they treat it like it's their own.
Yep.
And then I think it exists where there's folks that are using the Section 8 program that may not know how to care for their property, or like you said, maybe they may take it for granted. I think all of those exist.
I agree.
I think there's also activists who are on the opposite end of the property management company, who see that there are discriminations, and there are some landlords that also discriminate, right?
Of course.
And so all of those exist, and I think we can't for this to work, we have to acknowledge that all of those things exist. And then I think, right? Yeah. And then we're not pointing finger, and we're not saying who's bad, who's good, but then now we say, okay, the issue does exist, that it does create it's a cost that's connected to having folks who don't upkeep their property or their home, and then that has unintended consequences where then we get to the point where landlords don't want to support Section 8 program. And that's not good either, because that's not the solution either. And so I think that maybe the solution might be, so after having all that conversation, then I think we say we need to be targeted. The folks who are not taking care of their property, why are they not taking care of their property? Who should be holding them accountable? Is it the landlord, or is it the community partners?
Yep.
Or is it the county, or is it the public housing holding folks accountable to the agreement, right? And then and where does the property management company play it? What is their role in all this? And so I don't know exactly what the answer will be, but I think that is the right approach, so that we know, then we can understand those who discriminate against property against Section 8 voucher can be held accountable. Folks who are abusing the property are held accountable. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I think it's important for me, or in my eyes. It's very important for whoever is in those positions to have the proper understanding, and a lot of that has to do through like their life experience. So you going through public housing to having your own home, you have a certain type of experience. And at the same time, somebody that's been a community activist over all of their lives, who's never, had to go from bad to good, or, has a different view of people that, well, they don't have it, they should just be given something. You and I think, relate in the fact where we understood that things have to be earned, not given. And those type of people, or you need to be surrounded by those type of people in order to make an effective judgment call when it comes to, Section 8, when it comes to housing, when it comes to who landlords are. I think there's a general stigma when it comes to, for example, landlords, where, and this is in my lifetime and my mentors that have, guided me through real estate in the last 2 decades, they've been, blue collar citizens. It's no different than somebody having a grocery store or an auto shop for somebody to make a living from owning a couple of rental properties. And that means that they don't have unlimited amounts of money to do turnovers. They don't have unlimited amounts of money to do extensive, unnecessary repairs. Those are all things I think that matter, where people don't account for that. They just say, well, hey, they're landlords, they're renting, therefore they have unlimited amount of money, so they can afford to do it. So it's not fair to assume that, just as it's not fair to assume that every single person that's on Section 8 is going to destroy the property. Right. Because like you said, we've had wonderful tenants who've had a Section 8 voucher, who understand the way they need to take care of the property, and they take pride in where they live, no matter if they rent or whatever. So,
and I think we're getting we're getting somewhere with this conversation, and I like that. How we do co-enforcement with property management and property owners and things like that. I think it makes sense to have those sort of same expectation from members of the community if they're in that program, right?
Right.
And so that we all win together. And I know that this housing discrimination is something that, so my office, we're researching right now, and there's still a lot more work to do.
Yep.
We may base some of our decision on what's happened in Minneapolis, but we need to look more at this more. And then at some point, so I'm taking off my candidate hat, but my council member hat on. Got to be distinction about that, and to have a conversation with folks like you all, VSM at the table, and the activists, so that we can hear each other's side of the story and come up with a solution that works for everybody.
Right, and I feel, again, I don't know the 100% all the details when that particular rule came into play. I think
it's not enforcement yet.
It's not enforcement, so next year.
Yep.
But from, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is there's a lack of housing for Section 8 candidates, which is now growing. And the way to combat that at the city, county level, wherever, is to basically just have a law that says, well, you can't discriminate based on the voucher, which to me is avoiding the question. The real question is like, okay, well, why are there a growing number of Section 8 or voucher candidates? How do we fix that issue?
Right. So the root cause, right? The root cause of homelessness and things like that. So all the issues are connected. I mean, if you think about people, it's connected to education. Good education is connected to stable housing. Stable housing is connected to probably mental health, trauma. Right? All of those things are interconnected. And so so I think that that's why it's important when we say we want to talk about housing discrimination. We're also we're not we have to step back a little bit and look at the big pictures.
Right.
And when you mentioned earlier about homelessness and so we don't want people on the street. I mean, so we want people in home. We want people
nobody wants
in affordable
people on the
housing.
street. Yeah.
Exactly. So cutting, not having voucher, not allowing Section 8 voucher is not a solution either.
I agree. It's the same. Again, somebody that's been on food stamps, somebody that's been on public assistance. I looked at it, and my family looked at it as a step-up program. Okay, and I think a lot of
that's true. Yeah,
a lot of the people in power that have created those programs are considered to be a step-up program where you are using it for a limited amount of time, so you can move forward. That way, you can pass it on to the next person, which 100% on board, and I agree. It's how do we enforce that, or how do we educate that this really is a step-up program and not a way of life?
Right. And so that's the conversation that we need to be had. And I think that then the other key player would be like Ramsey County, because they do the workforce development. And are they doing their job? Is the city doing their job? And so look, we all have to work together on this thing.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's hard to imagine that this brother used to be on food stamp and public assistant. Right? I mean,
look it up.
That's our American story. I mean, that's what's great.
So just like yours.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, again,
it can be done.
It can be done, and I'm not going to say that while I had a horrible situation and you had a horrible situation, I'm sure there's somebody in the world that has it much worse. Still, no, without question. That you have all these circumstances that you can't even control. That there's no way around it. So, like a disability, person that's disabled. Because of some physical thing or mental deficiency, they are not able to get that step up, and I understand that. So I understand the scope, but I also think that with a little bit more care from the not just the public sector, but the government sector, that you as a candidate understand that you're a public servant, whereas people that are working, implementing the changes and moving things around, they still consider it as, okay, I'm done at 5 and that's where my job ends. I think still that they should have a certain onus on, hey, I'm getting paid from the taxpayers, therefore I should be serving them and their needs. Same like as police officers and firefighters. It's a community-based or organization. So it's about having that right mentality. And just like corporations have, like here we have trainings, we have a certain way of doing things. Maybe that's something that could be implemented for government employees or workers, not just in St. Paul, but everywhere.
Well, what I really like about just the idea, every year it seems more and more polarizing, everything that we talk about in politics, and just speaking to someone who is coming from the more liberal side of you, and speaking with I think we're more fiscally conservative probably than a lot of the residents of St. Paul. Probably not socially. Who knows? Like, who's supposed to say where we fall on that spectrum combined? But what I'm really excited about is the fact that you're willing to hear us out. And what I felt in Minneapolis was, if you had an objection about what they were doing with Section 8, and the reason I brought up that attorney story is that she was immediately being called a bigot for trying to just start a conversation. And, for me as a property owner, I'm not super excited to use Section 8. And it has nothing to do with, I don't care about people who have Section 8 vouchers. I can just look at it, and I guarantee you if I had 100 properties that were all Section 8, 100 that weren't of same quality, the one that's Section 8 is probably going to cost me more money over time, and it's going to cost me more time as well. And as soon as that problem's gone, we no longer have a problem. And if we can find a way to come together to mitigate that, because I think I'd even be happy to give some more time to give some other people, kind of a hand up and help them out.
Yeah. And
then we're going to be able to work together, both sides of the aisle, both mentalities, and figure it out.
From our perspective in this, business that we're in, we actually have hard data. We have tenants who have voucher or program paid rent and who don't. And not to say the people that don't or don't have any type of voucher program paid rent, that they're the most stellar tenants. Absolutely not. That's not the case. But again, it's just about, one person can ruin it or for a lot of people. And that stigma about Section 8, why we're even talking about it, is it has been there because there's a problem. And it really needs to be, resolved and looked at from a broader perspective. And how do you kind of, how do you fix things from, the root cause? Not just kind of pushing the problem down along or to the next person, which I think what Minneapolis or Hennepin County is doing, where they're basically solving their issue of having low inventory by making it mandatory to accept Section 8. And again, to me, that doesn't make sense. They're really just putting the issue off and giving it to all of the landlords to just figure it out.
Yeah,
it's tough. Yeah,
there's always two sides to every story, and you have the unfortunate task of being in the middle all the time, trying to negotiate and work it out.
We had talked, now that we're talking about Section 8 or people in need or whatnot, again, another stigma of St. Paul is, homelessness, or people that are homeless, roaming the streets, and where is the city with that? And I've been perplexed now for many years what I see, just within a couple blocks where we do business, and what, Catholic Charities, for example, is doing and building that $150 million facility to house and solve this problem. If you have more information on what's happening, we would love to know, and kind of where things are going in order to address that problem, because that was one item that I believe all of the candidates spoke about as one of their initiatives.
Yeah, and so I was able to support the Dorothy Day program, Catholic Charity, and it was modeled after Higher Ground, what's happened in Minneapolis. It's pretty unique. It's very strategic because it's got multiple floors. The first floor is like people who need media service, and then how you support them and you move them up, and then and while you're doing that, you're doing a full service workforce development, education, and then you get them to the fourth floor. I mean, that's like housing, and then from there, how do we transition them back into the neighborhood? And so it's a I think it's very comprehensive strategy. And so that has worked in Minneapolis. I think that what I've seen is that folks who are homeless also have issue with mental health.
100%.
And so that has something to do with trauma and generationals and all sorts of stuff, right?
It could be, like you mentioned, your war trauma. And I've had similar things too, where you can just imagine if that builds on itself for 10 years. How mentally unstable an individual can get, and if somebody's been homeless for a decade or 2 decades, that could just escalate if not treated.
Absolutely, and so because of that, we need more than just the city. The county actually does the mental health services. Some of the housing vouchers and things like that usually come from the city. Ramsey County.
Yep.
And so Ramsey County, the city, Catholic Charity, Wilder Foundation, all these neighborhood organizations, we have to solve it together. And I think from we may drive by a homeless person and we have all sorts of assumption, but we don't understand their history, their struggle. Like if you didn't tell about your Polish background, I probably wouldn't know that. And so I think that we, even though there's an issue, we have to be, I want to say, generous in figuring out how to solve it, right? And we can't just, and all the players needs to be at the table and to do their part. Otherwise, the city just doesn't have the money and the resource to provide mental health issue or to mental health services or to have housing vouchers to put people into a home.
I'm all for helping community outreach, and again, I accept that people will have mental health issues, and a lot, like you said, a lot of homeless people do suffer from those, which is why they're in the position they're in, and I want to help them, but I also want to enforce and have stricter rules when it comes to that, because it's a slippery slope. Where you kind of just let things happen and get out of control, where we need to set limits and we need to be a little bit more decisive in actions. And just kind of, again, real life story, as I live in Maplewood. And I get off the Wakuta exit off of 35E. And on either side is right next to the church over by St. Mary's. There's a grass on either side, and it was filthy of, garbage, tents, etc., through winter. And nothing was done by the city, and no enforcement was done by anyone. The people that are there, whether it be homeless or whatnot, they're just continuing to do that. And at one point, it was all clean. I went through the exit. I was like, wow, the city finally came by and cleaned it all up, and it looked fantastic. But then come to find out from Dario is that I guess the residents just got sick of it and just took matters into their own hands and fixed the issue, which, again, I love. And that's part of, the community and, why St. Paul, I think, is such a great city, is because people are willing to roll their sleeves up and actually take care of the problem. But a week and a half later, the problem starts to begin again. So there, I'm like, well, hey, come on. If we can have more decisive and action and have it enforced, that should also be on the table, just like anything else is. And as far as helping or community outreach to the people that need it.
Yeah, that's. I remember that story. It's a unique situation. From what my understanding is that the city was informed that this was happening, littering and people camping out there. But unfortunately, it was on state ground, right? And so there's those jurisdiction where if it's state ground, then it's state's responsibility. And if we go, it takes energy and it takes time for the city to go and clean that up. So who's going to pay for that city time? Is it the city taxpayer from the city, or should it be the state reimbursing the city? And so that, I don't know how the negotiation went with that, but the city is also, I would say that we don't want to, we're careful about how we're spending the residents' tax dollar. And if that is a jurisdiction of the state, then the state should have some responsibility in taking care of their ground. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And that's kind of unfortunate that that's kind of how government works sometimes with different jurisdiction, but that's what
that
it
makes
is.
a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, the red tape that needs to come off is, and I think that's where the residents like, hey, we're just going to take care of it.
Right.
But again,
and I'm proud of them. Hey, they were leaders that's fine. For
and
our
that's,
community.
At one instance, my thought process was like, what the hell is going on? And then they step in and I learn about this. I'm like, wow, that's another reason why I love being here in the city And it's the same way where I'm walking down the street and I see a piece of trash or whatever, I pick it up and I'll put it in the trash bin.
Yeah.
Especially around Mears Park. So that's the type of, I think, ownership that we need to instill, not just in business owners, but the general public, in order to make the city great.
You can come down my block anytime. I'm serious. I would go home and I would pick up all these litter on my street, and then the next day it would be back there again. A different
amazing.
kind of trash. Well, it's like, how do they appear here? How do they reappear? And whoever's tossing them, I just want to let you know, the trash don't magically fly and then find themselves in the dump.
Whoever's littering, just know Dai Thao's coming for you.
I think, again, that's where that sense and pride in ownership or community involvement comes into play.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you one last question, and then we'll end it up here?
Yep.
We host another podcast called Monday Motivation, and a lot of it is just entrepreneurs, people who want to make something of their life.
It's about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's really, really short. I just wanted to really touch base with you quickly, because you kind of skipped over a pretty amazing story of personal accomplishment and a very inspirational story of you going from someone living in public housing to living in the suburbs, and sounds like doing pretty well for yourself, enough to the point that you started wanting to give back to the community. What, if you could give some advice to someone who is in that feeling of hopelessness that a lot of, I know, young people go through on a regular basis, regardless of their situation, what would you want to kind of guide them to do?
I was just, I'm not that wise. But
just speak from the heart.
Yeah.
but I think that, whatever. If you believe, so today is Tuesday, right?
Yep.
And so tomorrow it's going to be Wednesday. Are you convinced tomorrow's going to be Wednesday?
I'm convinced.
You?
100%.
Okay. So if a young person or anybody is in a desperate situation, if you are as convinced that your dream will happen just as much as you believe that tomorrow will be Wednesday, if you have that same conviction, if you work for it, then it can happen. And once you make that commitment, that you just can't lie to yourself. You can lie to anybody, you can lie to whoever, but you just can't lie to yourself. And from there, your wildest dream will come true.
Awesome.
That's great. Before we go, we're gonna set up a link within this podcast and the YouTube to your website, to your Facebook page, and if people want to donate, what is the best way to donate to your
campaign?
Sure. Go to daithao.org. Daithao, DAITHAO.org. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
When I walk into this office, there's so much promise here, so much energy. I like the setup.
Thank you.
I think the only place that VSM is going to go is to go up. So
thank you so much.
Your success is my success. Your success is the success of the city. So keep it going.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Councilman Dai Thao.